Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Tonight Show. Just bear with me, I'm getting things set up. Hey, Leaf for Truth, welcome to the show. I think you will probably find this interesting. Okay, there we go. I did the description thingamajigger. Now I need to do the share it to Facebook, and then we're good to go. That's certainly lovely. Almost there. Okay, folks, so good evening. Welcome to tonight's episode of my side series titled Kevin's Soapbox. Tonight I wanted, uh, partly to get into where I think this series is going now that I've had some time to think it through, and to get into, of course, the topic I've chosen, which is Young Earth Creationism. But first, let me clarify something. So, as I've talked about, probably to the point that many of my fans are bored, a long time ago I used to do a radio show called The Lou Gentili Show. During that time, I was very well known for targeting people I thought were full of hot air, shall we say, and making them look dumb on air. Um, when I started my own show, as much as I enjoyed that, my original thought was, I'm too old for this. I mean, I started it 4 years ago, so I was 39 at the time, because I'll be, yeah, 39 at the time, and I'm like, I'm too old for this nonsense. I'm going to just stick to having people on the show I respect that I think have something worthwhile to say. Um, and that's still true. I don't intend to have crackpots and nut job people I consider insane on the show if I can help it. Um, or worse yet, people that I think are actively defrauding someone. But the thing that's also occurred to me is I have a voice. I don't have a huge following. I mean, I'm not even at 600 subscribers yet, nor do I get the thousands of views that bigger channels do. But I do have a voice. And while there are many atheists out there, my friend Cyrus the Skeptic, and my friends, I should say, Cyrus the Skeptic and Steve McRae, for example, who's not an atheist, he's an agnostic, Lisa for Truth, do a really good job of calling out nonsense. And I don't fault them for that. But I feel as a Christian I have a moral obligation to stand up for what I know to be true and what I believe to be true and what I know to be factual. Um, Not exclusively, and don't think this is going to be Kevin hates Christianity. Remember, at the end of the day, I am a Christian. Um, so it's not exclusively going to be aimed at Christian targets, although the first two clearly are. But there is going to be a Christian bent because I believe that when Christians see another Christian doing something wrong, they have an obligation to stand up. You know, when I look around, and it's why I did the first of these soapbox videos about the Make America Straight Again insanity. I saw Mr. Atheist doing videos about it. I saw Soros doing videos about it. Lisa for Truth's been doing videos about it. Um, all of these great people have been doing videos, but they're not Christian, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I'm not condemning any of you or anyone else who's listening for not being a Christian. But Christians have a responsibility to stand up to each other and say this isn't right. And that's kind of what I want to do with this series. Is to stand, even though, yeah, I'm a member of the paranormal community, I believe in ghosts and angels and demons, and I'm never going to pretend otherwise or apologize for that. That doesn't mean I agree with everything that people that claim to have, that hold similar beliefs, espouse. There's some horrible things that are done even by very well-meaning people in that field. And we're going to get into that too. We're going to get into the shady side of various medical woo and things of that nature. But tonight I want to target in particular Young Earth Creationism. Partly because it is not scientific by any definition of the word, but also because I think it actively damages Christianity as a whole. Let me be clear. I am not. It is not my intention with this video to set up a no true Scotsman fallacy. I am not saying that Ken Ham, or Kent Hovind, or Eric Hovind, or Ray Comfort, or any other Young Earth creationist isn't really a Christian. I am not accusing any of these men of fraud or any other criminal behavior, partly because that runs into slander issues, but also because I don't know. I don't know what's in someone else's heart. I don't know if you're really a Christian. I don't know if you're not really a Christian. I fundamentally do not believe I have the right to make that judgment. But I do have a right and an obligation to judge what you do. There's a great verse in the Bible that applies here, in fact. Let me look it up so I get the right. I remember the wording, but I want the right verse. So Matthew 7:15-20. Beware false prophets who come in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Even so, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Each tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Therefore, by their fruits you will know them. I'm not advocating for burning anyone alive either. But that's my point. I'm going to talk about what they believe and what they teach and the impact of what they teach. Judge for yourself what sort of fruit you think they are bearing. And here's another important point that you won't see a lot. Welcome back. A lot of these people do that. I will. Don't take my word for anything. I am no prophet. I am no seer. I am no great religious leader. I'm not even a scientist, for goodness sakes. I'm a guy who's done some research and tried to educate myself. There are lots of people on the internet that know a lot more about what I'm going to talk about tonight than I do. I'm going to link to some of them in the description after the show. Off the top of my head, I would highly recommend Talk Origins is an excellent website. Biologos is a good website for Christians because it's written by Christians, specifically targeting other Christians and trying to explain this to them. The writings of, what's his name? Francis Collins is also a really good place for Christians to go. Francis Collins, and yes, I'll be getting to him as well, is an evangelical Christian who is one of the most respected geneticists on the planet. This is the guy who ran the Human Genome Project in the United States. This is the guy who was picked by Barack Obama to be the head of the National Institutes for Health. He is smart, he is intelligent, he is a dedicated Christian, and he is a believer in evolution and other scientific models. Iger Vision says, hello, I'm here to defend creationist. I became a Young Earth Creationist a year ago. you're welcome. I do not block people who disagree with me. Feel free to ask questions. I'll try to respond to them as best as I can. As long as you become, yeah, as long as people keep it civil, dissent is welcome. Even if you're not that civil, it's usually welcome, although I may not read it on the air. But Lisa for Truth also pointed out, so some other sources you can find here on YouTube. Aaron Ra is really prickly about religion, and while he is an excellent source of science, he is not a good source on philosophy at all. Um, which is fine. His expertise is phylogeny, not philosophy. There's nothing wrong with not being an expert on those things. Um, Tony Reed also has a really good series here on YouTube called "How Creationism Taught Me Real Science." Um, if you go um, back through my channel, you can find an interview with them. Iger Vision has made a couple of statements, and right off the bat, I want to correct the third of them, actually. So he says the Earth is only about 6,000 years old. We'll get back to that. The flood happened about 4,400 years ago. We'll get back to that as well. And then he says, and Jesus Christ walked this earth about 2019 years ago. Yes, and this is the one I want to specifically address first, which is Jesus Christ walking the earth 2019 years ago. The man, Yeshua, son of Joseph, or Joseph technically, was born probably somewhere between 3 and 5 BC. We're not entirely certain of this because of a series of mathematical errors that were done at the time in the town of, almost certainly in the town of Bethlehem. There isn't, and there is evidence, there is historical evidence for this, and that's a topic for another night. 2000, at 2019 years ago, he would have been a toddler. I mean, 3 to 5. We're talking 3 to 5 years old. Even as a Christian, and let's be clear again about this. I am a Christian. I am not saying that God is not real. I am not saying that Jesus is not the Son of God. That's not my point. Although I agree, you also make an interesting point in saying that your source for these numbers is the Bible, but not one of those dates is given anywhere in Scripture. Let's be clear about that. So let's start, I guess, by where shall I start this? So for those of you who don't know, the Young Earth Creationist movement is a religious movement within Christianity that actually started in the early to mid 20th century. It's not a very old idea, and it holds. Yeah, the universe is somewhere. There's debate about this between 6 and 10,000 years old. That number itself was arrived at by a man by the name of Bishop Ussher, James Ussher to be specific. In the 17th century. He was an archbishop in the Church of Ireland. What he did is he did. There is nowhere in the Bible that explicitly gives a number of years. He based it on adding up the genealogies given in the Bible. The most obvious problem with this is that the genealogies don't all agree with each other. And he just, and also he made somewhat arbitrary decisions about how long a generation was, particularly when you get further back in the Bible. People taking text at face value. Adam lived 900 years. Many other people lived an extremely long period of time, according to the Bible. Generations aren't necessarily what they mean. Then there's the whole question of, was the earth created in 6 literal consecutive days, which relates to the translation of the Hebrew daim, which can, yes, mean a literal 24-hour period of time, although how a 24-hour period of time exists without a sun for the earth to orbit, or to rotate in relationship to, is a really good question I've never seen a satisfactory answer to. But the other thing is, it's used in the same word is translated to mean day in other senses throughout, even in the book of Genesis. as well as elsewhere in the Bible, to mean a period, just like we use the word day in other senses. But here's the question that creates a problem for this. Um, and it's the one question that no creationist I'm aware of has a legitimate answer to. They call it the starlight problem. The most distant thing in our universe that we are able to detect is 13 billion light years from Earth. Now, a common objection to this, particularly by Kent Hovind, one of the targets of tonight, is that a light year is a measurement of distance, not a measurement of time, which is true. It's the distance light travels in 1 year. The problem is, for something to travel 13 billion light years, it's not possible for light to have traveled 13 billion light years in distance in 6,000 years. The speed of light is a constant. Yes, there are studies that have been done, and I am not a physicist, so I am the wrong person to discuss this. Um, Really, you're going for the flat Earth, which has been debunked for literally 2,200 years. Um, we're not touching that. This tonight's stop. There are certain topics, and this is probably another side video I will do at some point, which is topics that will never be given airtime on this show. One of which is flat Earth. But again, for the light from the most distant star to get here in 6,000 years doesn't work. There's no rational explanation for it. You have to assume that. And here's the problem. Here's the one of the most basic reasons I consider the idea of young Earth creationism actively damaging to Christianity. For this to be true, you are effectively saying that God is a liar. Because, yes, as a thought experiment, if God is all powerful, he had the ability to create an object 13 billion light years from Earth and stretch light out in some way that um it, I can't even begin to touch this. That he could have stretched light out in some magical manner to violate everything we understand about the laws of physics for reasons. But in doing so, he actively is deceiving his creation. Because being omnipotent, God would have known that humans would develop science, would eventually measure the distance to that star's 13 light years away, billion light years away. Or excuse me, I'm sorry, I need to correct myself because my science is off. It's not a star, it's actually a galaxy. That we would have measured that distance, come up with 13 billion light years, and we'd have logically concluded that the universe had to be more than 6,000 years old. God would have known all of this, being all-knowing, and actively created the universe in such a way that it deceives his creation. Creationism calls God a liar. And this isn't the only instance. Now that I remember where I originally wanted to start tonight's discussion, it's actually the concept of I'm sorry, this is just so ridiculous I have to read it. You're going to struggle with the Bible till you understand we live in a snow globe. The heliocentric model is a cartoon CGI Freemasonic Jesuit lie. Okay, let me clue you in on some reality, Iger. As much as I don't want to get into this, The Freemasons is a bunch of. They're not even all that rich anymore. Mostly it's a rich old boys club that get together to drink. They tend to be made up of powerful people because the powerful attract the powerful. The Freemasons are not run by the Jesuits, and if you actually believe that, you really need to take the time to study the history of both the Freemasons and the Jesuits. The Jesuits, aka the Society of Jesus, are a Roman Catholic order. And the Roman Catholic order has banned membership in the Freemasons for literally hundreds of years. Jesuits are not Freemasons. That claim is evidence, please. Also, yeah, the heliocentric model is not an invention of the Freemasons, nor is it an invention of the Jesuits. The fact of the globe Earth was first figured out by Eratosthenes, the no, they aren't occultists. Okay, the Freemasons have a degree of occultism. The Jesuits are Christians. They're Roman Catholics, dude. You need to research the subject instead of repeating debunked nonsense. I mean, this is. And Pythagoras isn't the one. Yes, Pythagoras was actually a magician, which is completely irrelevant to the subject. Although, no, occultism is substantially older than Pythagoras. Um, really, man, I don't know where. I mean, are you just cribbing notes off of Alex Jones? This stuff is ridiculous. Eratosthenes. Do you have citation needed? Claiming that he was part of Pythagoras' school. Eratosthenes figured out. Not only did he figure out the Earth was a globe, he figured out the diameter of the globe. And here's the more important point, kiddo. Before I put you, because frankly, this is going way off topic. Um, no, Ken Hovind, as full of it as he is, at least is aware of the fact the world's round. Um, I don't know. I don't know if you are a Poe or just out of your mind. But goodbye. We're going back to the actual topic of the night. um, if somebody wants to defend Young Earth Creationism, please feel free. But I'm not going to sit here and listen to the absolute nonsense that is the Flat Earth movement. Um, Especially because the Jesuits come back into the story. So let's get on to the topic at hand, specifically the character of Kent Hovind and Ken Ham. Both of them make a similar claim about evolution, which is that there are six definitions of evolution. First, you have cosmic evolution, which is what people commonly call the Big Bang, although that's actually also a misnomer. Then you have stellar evolution, the evolution of stars. You have chemical evolution, where um, the formation of elements, and then you have the formation of the first living things, aka so known as abiogenesis. Then you have macro and microevolution. The obvious problem with this is, of those six definitions of evolution, three of them aren't even biology. And of the remaining three, one's not a theory, and the other two, yes, are actually evolution. Although he claims the last one isn't. Abiogenesis is not a theory, and this is an important thing to understand. And we're going to get into what the word theory properly means in context. And Lisa, you're absolutely right. It was an expansion. So let me tell everybody a story that a lot of people don't know about the origins of what I actually think we should go back to calling the cosmic egg model. Because if you go back to the man who originally proposed what we now call the Big Bang's first paper where he proposes it, he refers to it as the cosmic egg. It's not an explosion. So As Ken Hovind famously puts it, 13.8 billion years ago, you had nothing exploded into everything. Um, if you actually go back, so the man who developed the theory was a man by the name of George Lemaitre. Lemaitre started with an observation, which was Hubble's observation that the universe is expanding. He looks at the fact the universe is expanding, and he follows that idea logically, and comes up to the conclusion that eventually matter was condensed into a very small point. The size of the point over years got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until the point is smaller than the period at the end of a sentence. Here's a really important point that disproves the Young Earth argument about the Big Bang right off of the bat. They will tell you that it is an explosion of nothing. Again, it's an expansion, not an explosion. They're not the same thing. Just things expanding outward, like you have a deflated balloon, you blow air into it, the balloon doesn't explode, it gets bigger, it expands. And somebody who's more familiar with physics would probably give you a better example of that. But I'm okay with the biology we're going to get into tonight. I'm not that good with the physics. I never was very good. I'm not good with math, so I'm not very good with physics. But Lemaitre proposes this idea. And when he first proposes it, it's not well received. This is one of the most common myths people have about the Big Bang, is they think, oh, the atheist, it was proposed by an atheist. The atheists flocked to it. Atheists loved it because it eliminated the need for God. Everything I just said is wrong. For a start, George Lemaitre was a Roman Catholic priest. He was a Belgian priest, a member of the Jesuit Society, and he was an astronomer. His idea was not an attempt to refute the existence of God. The man believed in God. In fact, the people that resisted initially were atheists more than Christians. Particularly the Roman Catholic Church was very quick to adopt the theory, against his advice, funny enough. But he proposes his theory. Atheists and agnostics look at it and go, this is terrible, because the theory that was prominent at the time is what's known as the steady state model. The steady state model basically held the universe is what it is now. It always has been this way. It will always be this way. It's largely unchanging. For an atheist, this is a pretty good model, because if a universe is the way it is and always has been the way it is, the universe has no beginning. If the universe has no beginning, it has no creation. If there's no creation, there's no creator. And yes, I know you're back, Iger, and you're welcome back. Just stay off the topic of flat Earth. That's not the subject for tonight. If you really want to go talk about flat Earth, feel free to go make. You have a username. I assume you have a channel. Go make videos about how the world's a pizza. But so he proposes this idea. The atheists react not well to the idea. Particularly one of the most famous physicists of the day, a little dude we all know by the name of Albert Einstein, has this to say. Your math is flawless, your physics is abominable. Can I unblock you? Yeah. Am I going to? Probably not. But he says that he dismisses the theory. Here's the irony of him dismissing his theory. Einstein's theory of relativity works much better in the Big Bang model of the universe than it ever did in the steady state model. He had to alter his own theory because he didn't like the implications of an expanding universe that it provided. Later in life, Einstein would go on to embrace the Big Bang. We're going to get into why it's called that in a moment. And yes, Lisa for Truth, you're 100% right. The name Big Bang is actually pejorative. Um, he would go on to embrace it, and he would call rejecting it probably the greatest mistake of his career. Meanwhile, the scientific community eventually is won over by the evidence. Particularly, scientists propose that if the Big Bang model is true, there should be a low level of background radiation detectable throughout the universe. It's known as a cosmic microwave background radiation. This is a really critical point about what makes something a scientific theory versus just an idea. Theories make models that can make predictions that you can test. If you test the prediction and you find what you're looking, it says you should find, then then the model has value. If it doesn't, you discard it and you move on. So the microwave background radiation was proposed not by the Major himself, as I understand it, but by scientists based on his predictions. But it was predicted in 1948 by Ralph Alpher and Robert Herman. They were able to estimate the temperature of the background radiation would be 5 Kelvin. 2 years later, they re-estimated it to be 28 Kelvin. The estimate was due to a misestimate of the Hubble constant. There's a lot of discussion about this. And then they actually found it. I'm trying to look. Oh, they found it here in New Jersey. Let's see. So 1948. We just So they discussed it for years, and then the mainstream astronomical community was not intrigued by the idea. Their ideas were later rediscovered by Yakov Zledovich during the 60s and independently predicted by Robert Dike, or Dicke. I probably butchered the pronunciation at the same time. And then in 1964, Soviet astrophysicist A.G. Duroshkevich and Igor Novikov actually managed to detect this radiation. So it was a theoretical idea suggested in 48 and detected and found to exist. Oh, good lord. Yeah, Iger, you're getting blocked for good. You have you have nothing to contribute to this kind of discussion. Goodbye. Um, Calling people names without anything to back and saying it's not true without nothing to back it up isn't an argument. But they found this radiation. They predicted it 20 years beforehand, and then there it was, exactly where it was predicted. That's what makes it science. Ken Ham, the other person aside from Kent Hovind, famously says that there's a difference between historical and observational science. Observational science is, according to him, what you do in a lab and you can test. Historical science is extrapolating backwards and trying to make predictions about the past. What Ken Ham doesn't understand, and many other creationists don't, because he's hardly the only one to use this argument, is that both, if it's actual science, it's all observational. Nobody just said, okay, the Big Bang is true, let's all go home now. They applied the proposed model to the universe. They predicted the discovery of the cosmic microwave background radiation, and then they found it. If they hadn't found supporting evidence, the theory would have eventually been discarded. This has happened before. Flogström is one of many examples of something that many scientists took very seriously for a long period of time that's eventually been proven to be false, even though it once had the status of a theory. The Big Bang is widely accepted because it works, and it is not an active attempt to disprove the existence of God. Again, it was started by a man who was devoutly religious. He spent his entire life devoutly religious. There's no basis to assume that he wanted to disprove the existence of his own creator. There are people out there, there are Christians out there mostly, particularly, that would argue that Catholics aren't really Christians. Um, that's a really problematical point of view for a lot of reasons. But even if you take that point of view, um, Catholics are not atheists. Catholics believe in God, even if you don't think it's your God. Jesuits believe in God, even if you don't think it's your God. Um, they do not have a vested interest in disproving their own ideas. But again, and here's the critical point, actual evolution is a theory in biology. The cosmic egg, aka the Big Bang, is a theory in cosmology. Cosmology is the study of the universe, the study of origins, study of planets, stars, and things of that nature. Biology is the study of living things. Evolution is properly, the theory of evolution only relates itself to the behavior of life. This is one of the first. Aside from effectively calling God a liar, this is another one of the big problems with both Kent Hovind and Ken Ham and Hello Endersleep, is that they deliberately misrepresent the science involved. Okay, so Ender, you say you have or Ender Sheep. I apologize, not Ender Sleep. Feel free to share your problem if it's related to the topic. We can talk about it. If it's not, I can try to help in another way. But that's the thing you run into. Oh, and this is going into troll territory. Okay, you're going on timeout. I'll give you a chance. If you want to come back and talk about something rational, you'll be welcome to. If you want to keep this foolishness going, you're going to get blocked. Hey, I'm getting attention. I'm drawing trolls, which was admittedly partly the point. But so again, if we're going to talk biology, if we're going to talk about evolution, let's talk about evolution, not the Big Bang, not stellar formation, not how you get various elements from other elements, nuclear fusion and fission. Again, I'm probably getting terms wrong. I'm not a physicist by any stretch of the imagination. A real quick note on this: one of the ideas that creationists will put forward is that the idea of you can't get one element from another. Again, do a little bit of research. Oh, actually, there's two things before I want to get into evolution. One is you can't get one element from another. In point of fact, you can. Aside from the fusion and the processes that run the sun and other stars gradually turn hydrogen into helium, you can actually transmute one element into another using nuclear reactors and colliders and things of that nature. In point of fact, the famous effort of the alchemist, which is to transform lead into gold, is possible using nuclear physics. That's the good news. The bad news is the last I heard, and this is years ago, so they may have found a different way of doing it, though somehow I doubt it. The gold that you get from turning lead into gold is radioactive and extremely unstable and decomposes very quickly. But it is at least impossible. One element can become another element. And in elements, obviously, in this case, I'm talking about the elements on the periodic table. I'm not talking about earth, air, wind, and fire. But again, the other thing I want to point out, because I find this absolutely fascinating, just because it is so contradictory to what people would assume, contradictory to what I always assumed. So, there's a whole idea. Kent Hovind in particular likes to talk about how the Big Bang says that nothing exploded, and he's very particular about it being nothing, and somehow became everything. And Creationists will often argue this is impossible because, one, nothing can explode, and two, something can't come out of nothing. Again, when you say that everything in existence was compressed into a point smaller than the dot, the period at the end of a sentence, that's not nothing. It's a singularity. It's something. It's a very, very, very infinitesimally small something, but it's still something. Two, he's actually wrong, and demonstrably wrong. You can get something out of what is, for all intents and purposes, nothing. We call them virtual particles. Take in a vacuum, we have directly observed particles that simply pop into existence and vanish almost instantaneously. The idea boggles my mind. I think it probably boggles a lot of people's minds. But it is possible. I'm not a physicist. I have a very limited understanding of all of this. But from what I do understand, it seems to relate to the fact that even a vacuum is not actually nothing. There's an energy that exists within a vacuum that called, very creatively, of course, they named it vacuum energy. But there's something there. And that something is what's causing them to pop in and out of existence. Because here's the thing: there's the laws of thermodynamics, which is a concept in physics that creationists love and completely misunderstand. And the first one is that it is famously said that matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed. That's not only is that not actually what it says. It's a mistake. It's specifically saying energy cannot be created or destroyed. And more specifically, that the energy of a system is always going to equal out. Meaning, in fact, if the total energy of a system is zero, it can simply remain zero. But you can't destroy energy. Energy will always exist. You can't completely destroy matter. What you can do is you can convert matter into energy, energy into matter. So, in fact, there's, again, limited understanding, but as I understand it, in some modern fields of physics, they see matter as slowed down energy. But again, we're way out of my wheelhouse. Let's get back onto firmer ground, and let's talk about the actual theory of evolution. So, the question is, what is evolution? It's popularly seen as two things: microevolution and macroevolution. I don't know if there's a single creationist on the planet at this point in time that questions the idea of microevolution, which is as they put it, it's variation within a species. Let me give you a simple test that can be conducted of microevolution that will demonstrate that it's real. Get a very large population of fruit flies. Apply pesticide to this population of fruit flies. Now, you apply pesticide, one of three things is going to happen. All of them are going to survive, all of them are going to die, or most likely, most of them are going to die, or some of them are going to die, some of them are going to be fine, some of them wind up getting sick and may die later. So if you get the first result, you need to get a different population of fruit flies. If you get the third result, everything dies, you need a new population of fruit flies. The result you want is the most likely result, which is that you have some that lived and some that didn't. Let the survivors interbreed with each other. Then apply the same pesticide again. Probably fewer of them will die. Maybe not in the first iteration, but let the surviving population interbreed again. Apply the insecticide to them again. Keep doing this. If evolution is true, microevolution specifically, eventually you will have a population of fruit flies that are either immune to the insecticide or very resistant. Creationists, particularly Kent Hovind, is fond of telling people that this doesn't mean anything. It's not evolution, it's just variation. It doesn't prove anything. But this is the simplest this is evolution in action. Evolution itself as a whole means change in allele frequency. And if you're wondering what I mean, what an allele is, I was too the first time I heard this definition. Alleles are genes in a population over time. There's a lot of misconceptions that it has to be a gain of information, whatever that means, not a loss, which isn't true. It has to be a change. If you want a real simple example of what scientists consider evolution, that creationists might argue is a loss of information, a loss is scientists generally, as I understand it, think that fish evolved into amphibious type of creatures that eventually evolved into air-breathing creatures. When eventually the things evolved into air-breathing creatures, they would have lost the ability to breathe in the water. But it's still evolution because it's still change. The frequency of the genes have changed. Some of the common objections to this are, well, it doesn't add new genes, it just shuffles existing genes. That could be true. Certainly, although we do know actually that mutation can create new DNA, new organization. And again, I am really not a geneticist, so I'm going out. And anyone, Lisa, if you know more about this, or anyone watching later, if you want to make fun of me for getting things hilariously wrong, please, and you know what you're talking about, please feel free to do so in the chat or in the comments. Because the goal of this is not just to make fun of even me, it's to educate people. Please provide citations and links so that people can follow and better educate themselves, because that's the purpose of doing this. I'll have links in the description to a number of excellent sources, at least my opinion, excellent sources. But, alright, again, everyone agrees that these changes happen. Another simple example that I don't recommend anyone do, take a population of humans. Shoot everyone that has brown hair. Let them reproduce. Shoot all of their children who have brown hair. Repeat. Eventually there will be no brown-haired children in that population. There will, a famous example, of course, as well as if aliens invented a ray that killed everyone except people who had brown hair, and eventually everyone would have brown hair because that was the most advantageous. It's a somewhat silly example, but it is still the basic idea of evolution. Now, the question you run into is, yes, creationists all agree that this happens. The question is, where does it go from here? And that means going up the phylogenetic tree, or through the phylogenetic tree, and changing into something else. Tyrannosaurus, to use a creation example, Tyrannosaurus Rex transforming into a chicken. Or another one I just had a creationist use on me, little foxes turning into whales. We'll get into the mistake here. Kent Hovind in particular is famous for describing this as a change in kind. Here's the problem. Go through Kent's videos. Go through his many debates with actual scientists. Find me anywhere that actually gives a definition of what a kind is. Let's be very, very clear. Which of these things is not like the other is not a definition. Change in allele frequencies in a population over time. That's a definition. Any of the and he's absolutely right. Another criticism he has is that the word species, because in biology, when they say macroevolution, what they're actually talking about is evolution that takes place at the species level or the different level of clade. Um, and he thinks the word species is weak because it has multiple definitions, which is true. But the simplest definition of species, coming from dictionary.com, noun, biology, a group of living organisms consisting of similar individuals incapable of extending changing genes and interbreeding. A species is the principal natural taxonomic unit, ranking below a genus and denoted by the Latin binomial. For example, Homo sapiens, which Homo sapiens, sapien humans. Um, but the key point that is generally agreed upon about what makes most species a species is the ability of the members of the population to interbreed with each other and produce fertile offspring. A dog and a wolf are the same species. You can interbreed a dog and a wolf. They're subspecies of each other, or actually, dogs are subspecies of wolf by and large. Um, because the scientific name for dog is Canis lupus familiaris, um, or Canis lupus domesticus, whereas the scientific name for a wolf is Canis lupus. Um, but dogs and wolves can reproduce, and the offspring will be able to interbreed. What's interesting here is most members of the canine family can interbreed with each other. Dogs can interbreed with dingoes. Dogs can interbreed with jackals, wolves, and coyotes, and all of those can interbreed with each other. There is an exception: the fox. And which of these things is not like the other? If you put a dog, a fox, and a wolf, and an orangutan, or a cat, or maybe a little, together, the 6-year-old that Kent Hovind always uses as his expert on what a kind is will tell you the orangutan is the one that is not like the others. That's clearly the different kind. Or maybe less dramatically, a cat. Most people, maybe not 6-year-olds, but most people have a basic understanding that dogs and cats are not the same thing. Even dogs and foxes and cats, even though they're both fairly small, are not the same thing. Here's the thing, though. Foxes, while clearly a member of the Canidae family, cannot interbreed with any other existent member of the Canidae family. There are rumors of foxes being able to interbreed with, I want to say dogs, maybe one other thing, but no, there is no confirmed example of a fox and anything other than a fox in that family ever successfully reproducing with each other. Kind of interesting, don't you think? Which also relates to why kind is a poor definition. Now, do we have any evidence for speciation? In fact, we do. And this is one of the neatest examples I've found in studying evolution as an adult. At least I find it cool. Maybe you will as well. It's what we call ring species. There will be a link in the description to Talk Origin's excellent pair of web pages of observed examples of speciation. So you don't have to take my word for any of this. You can go look it up. You can find links to sources on that, and you can find a whole lot of other information. So there's more complex examples, but I'll give a really simple example of a ring species. Minnesotan hare, Alaskan hare, Floridan hare. All three are rabbits, they're hares. The same kind, if you will. Now, Minnesotan hare can interbreed with Alaskan hare. Minnesotan hare can interbreed with Floridian hare. All well and good. They're all the same species by the simplest definition of species. They're all the same kind because the verse in the Bible that talks about kinds says that they're able to bring forth, meaning they're able to reproduce. Here's where the problem comes in. Alaskan rabbits and Floridian rabbits can't interbreed with each other. There's also an example of, I want to say gecko, some type of lizard, where There's a whole series of related species. Started as one, hit a natural barrier, evolved around the barrier. I think in this case it was valley. They evolved around in the mountain regions around the valley, and eventually the two endpoints of the divergent evolution meet on the other side. Now, every other member of the related species, going back to the original, can interbreed with each other, but the two at the ends can't. This is speciation. One species has become another species. This is This is macroevolution by the scientific definition. If you want to argue, as Ken Hovind does, and Ken Ham as well, I believe, that macroevolution is a change in kinds, you have to define kind. You can argue that there are multiple definitions of species, and there are, and here's why there are multiple definitions of species. The same one definition of species doesn't fit every situation. There are other examples, obviously, but here's a real good question. Okay, if we accept that the ability to exchange DNA with each other, the ability to reproduce and produce viable offspring is the definition of a species, how do you determine what species of bacteria is which? Because bacteria reproduce asexually. They don't need genetic information from somebody. There are a number of simple life forms, and even a few multicellular life forms, as I understand it, they can reproduce asexually. They don't use and don't need and don't have a purpose for DNA from another source. So that basic definition of species doesn't work. But scientists still want a useful definition of the term. That's why they have different definitions to fit different situations. And that's just one example of why there are others. So the question this raises, and it's a fair question, let's be clear. Asking questions is not a bad thing. People should be curious. People should ask questions. People should try to understand these things, not just take them at face value. This is why I'm going to give sources in the description. I do not want you to believe these things because I told you to believe these things. I want you to research them for yourself and make an informed decision about whether you accept evolution or not. But, well, how do you know that humans evolved from monkeys? Or one of the worst arguments in creationism, to the point that Ken Ham on his website Answers in Genesis has even openly admitted it's a terrible argument for creationism. If man evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? This is an idea I actually learned a lot about from Aaron Ra. And it's the law of monophyly. That's the word I'm looking for. Whatever clade you remember, your ancestors were a member of, you will always be a member of. To put this in a way that's a little hard, I think, for people, I assume it's hard for people to wrap their heads around it because I find it hard to wrap my head around it. Okay, Lisa, have a good night. Thanks so much for tuning in. Pleasure to have you as always. But where was I? Okay, so I find this a little hard to wrap my head around. Dang, I lost. Excuse me. I'm losing my train of thought. Okay, yeah, there we go. So, when a distant primate ancestor of humans evolved into the first member of the Homo genus, I could be wrong, but I think what is it? Probably one of the earliest ancestors, the upright walking type would be Australopithecus afarensis, aka famously known as Lucy. And of course you have Homo erectus, Homo habilis, and we can go on all night. I exaggerate, but only slightly. But when that first happened, this new thing, which was, for lack of, there's probably intermediate stages I'm unaware of, but when the first primate population of primates gave first to the birth of the first Australopithecines, the Australopithecines were still primates. When they gave birth, when to later in the homogeneuses, all of those homogeneuses are still primates. We are still primates. If one day we, to go a little silly, just to illustrate a point, evolve to the point that we have wings and we can fly through the air, we will still be primates. Another example of this, as you've probably heard by now because it's pretty famous, dinosaurs evolved from birds. Right? Whether you believe this or not, I assume you've heard it before. Um, Birds are still considered dinosaurs. There's the famous idea: can a dog evolve into a non-dog? The answer is no. But a non-dog can evolve into a dog, according to the theory of evolution. Because whatever non-dog thing it was, it still is. Dogs, for example, are still members of the carnivora group. Carnivores are still mammals. Mammals are still vertebrates. Still eukaryotes. So everything all of those things still apply to us. We still fit those categories. Man is still a primate. We will always be primates. That is in keeping with the theory of evolution. What evidence do we have for this? Well, there are three major. There are lots of sources for evidence of evolution, but there are three major sources I think worth mentioning: paleontology. Two, and genetics. If you look at paleontology, we can find this line of ancestors going back. People will argue many of them were hoaxes. That's not true. Some of them were hoaxes. Piltdown Man was a hoax, for example. A few others were hoaxes. The science, and let's be clear, creationists never. I don't know of a single. And if somebody does, feel free to link an example in the description or in the chat if you're listening. As far as I know, no creationist has ever gone, that's not real, here's the science to back it up. Scientists, evolutionary biologists are ones who have pointed it out. And some of the ones that are called hoaxes aren't hoaxes. The most famous example, of course, is the Australopithecines. Lucy is not a hoax. You get people who will tell you they were, no, she's just a chimpanzee. She wasn't. The structure of her legs, the structure of her arms, clearly indicates the fact that actually, there's another. Did think of the third example, and I'll explain what it is as I get to it. But she was clearly the skeleton was designed to be bipedal, to walk upright, which chimpanzees and other primates can do so. Some of the time, they might normally are what we call knuckle walkers. They walk on their knuckles. This was someone who walked primarily upright, not on their knuckles. The next argument you'll often hear is you can find all these fossil, is that there's only one of them, and that the one bone was actually taken from a different skeleton found at the site, but some distance away. Not actually true. And in point of fact, let's assume, for the sake of argument, that the original Lucy fossil is a complete hoax. Never happened. We've found 300 other examples of that species in other locations in the world. They're not all hoaxes. There's no evidence to conclude they're hoaxes. But even beyond paleontology, genetics is also a really good example of evidence for evolution. There's a trait that, how do we know humans are primates? Why are we primates? Why are we still animals? Yes, humans are animals. Even the Bible implies this in multiple verses. But people object to this idea. People find it offensive. Science classifies things by and large into three major categories: animal, vegetable, mineral. Granted, there other categories, but we are not mineral. We are not vegetable. We are not protozoa. We are not parameciums. We are not fungus. We comport to the definitions of an animal. The only reason to say we are not animals is if you make some special exception for humans because they're humans. And in fairness, taxonomists in the past have tried to do so, mostly to fit their own prejudices. Humans are in fact animals. Humans are still primates. We fit all the characteristics of primates. We can look at our DNA and see evidence of our primate ancestry. For example, a common question that gets asked is if humans are primates, why do we have fewer chromosomes? A chimpanzee, humans have 24 pairs of chromosomes, and other members of the great apes have 24. It's legitimate. Again, asking honest questions is legitimate. We have 46 chromosomes, chimpanzees have 48. When we looked at the human genetics, we realized that two chromosomes that are found in chimpanzees fused together. Ancestral chromosomes 2A and 2B fused to produce human chromosome 2. No genes were lost from the fused ends of 2A and B. At the site of the fusion, there is approximately 150,000 base pairs sequences not found in chimpanzee. So basically, yeah, two chromosomes fused together. This is another common mistake that creationists make, and the creationist dance on this is endlessly entertaining. That mutation cannot change the number of chromosomes. This is wrong. This is hilariously wrong, and I'll tell you why this is hilariously wrong. Down syndrome. Most cases of Down syndrome, a child gets an extra chromosome, 21, giving them a total of 47 chromosomes instead of the normal 46 found in humans. Most creationists, when you point this out to them, will say, "Well, that's not an advantage. Having Down syndrome is not an advantage." I'm not saying that it is, but when you start with the flat statement that a mutation cannot create an additional chromosome, Down syndrome is a mutation that leads to a person having 47 instead of 46 chromosomes. The statement that it can't happen is disproven by the simple fact that we know of an example of it happening. This is also actually leads to another common misunderstanding of the subject, which is the idea of survival of the fittest and what makes a species fit to survive. People have a lot of weird ideas related to this, like humans are the most fit animals in the world. We're not. We are very well suited to our environment and to our particular advantages, and we do have several. Being endurance, one advantage we have over a number of predator species is a lot of predators are very, very fast, far faster than humans. We have them beat on endurance. Over a long run, there are species that we can beat just because we can keep running longer instead of faster. This came in handy during hunts with just simply running down prey. In bygone days. Another advantage, of course, that we have that we're all acutely aware of is our increased in capacity for intelligence. That makes us suited to survival. Um, but the common cold is a virus. It's very simple. It actually, by many standards, it doesn't even qualify as a living thing. But it's been with us for thousands of years, and nothing we have ever come up with has ever. We've never been able to cure it. We've never stopped it. It's still been around. It's been around, to be precise. The common cold virus came from birds about 200 years ago. So it's been around. I was wrong, not thousands. 200 years ago, the cold appeared. And with all of our advanced modern medicine, we can't even vaccinate against it, let alone cure it. And in point of fact, the reason we can is evolution. There isn't one form of common cold. There are many. It keeps mutating. This is another also why the flu is such a problem, and why they keep having to read every year. There's a new flu vaccine because it mutates so often. What the vaccine that works against one strain isn't useful against another. Very simple, but very well adapted. Um, and if you want to look at traits in the big animals sense, yeah, we are highly intelligent. But in a test of raw strength, elephants are vastly stronger than humans. In a test of speed, cheetahs, bears, and many other species are vastly faster than humans. Fish swim far better than humans. Dolphins and whales hold their breath better than humans. Survival of the fittest is the question of evolution is adapting to your environment. Those adaptations that allow a species to survive specifically to the point of breeding are what evolution means by survival of the fittest. And here's why. For a mutation to take hold, for a mutation to alter the course of a species, it has to be passed to the next generation. Let's take two hypothetical mutations and compare them in this case. Say a human was born tomorrow with the ability to live absolutely healthy, natural lifespan of 10,000 years. Never get sick. Bones would quickly heal, could heal a broken bone in 5 minutes. Basically Wolverine's level of healing, 10,000 years lifespan, but is sterile from birth. On the other hand, you have an individual also born tomorrow who will live 20 years in perfect health. They will live from now to the point they have their first child in perfect health. And the moment they give that child is born, they will die. If you asked many people, they would tell you that they would prefer to live for 10,000 years and have perfect health. From an evolutionary standpoint, the guy who lived to have his first child is fitter than the other one. Why? Because those genes will be passed on to the next generation. If you're sterile, your genes don't go anywhere. It doesn't matter how useful they are to you personally. Evolution does not, and this is an important concept in evolution. Remember, it's change in allele frequencies in a population over time, not in individuals. Populations evolved, not individuals. That's a really crucial point a lot of creationists misunderstand. There's actually a third example of evidence for common ancestry. And this is actually a really good example of of another problem with the idea of creationism, particularly and for that matter, its twin brother, intelligent design, which is creationism pretending to be scientific. It's not a different. It's not science, and I'll get into why. But if a super intelligent being designed life, it did so very badly. I'll give you a couple of examples. Humans have the genes to produce vitamin C internally. Not to, like a number of other mammals produce their own vitamin C naturally. They don't have the need to consume it that we do. Humans don't have that capacity, but we have the genes to do it. What else has those genes? Other primates. It's another example that points to a common ancestry. Another question that falls into this, and this is one I find interesting, the laryngeal nerve. Humans have a nerve that runs from our brains, down our throat, around the aortic arch, back up the neck to the larynx. It's what sends signals for speech and things of that nature. Now, from the brain to right about here is a pretty short distance. Why in heaven's name would an all-powerful, all-knowing God run the nerve all the way down around the aortic arch and back up? Yes, the nerve in question goes to other muscles and other organs and serves other purposes. But it's like wiring a house. If you're going to wire a light, I mean, again, I'm not an electrician, so I may be screwing this up, but okay, better example. Extension cord. This is something I actually have done, so I understand how to do it. If I want to plug an extension cord into an outlet and run it to my laptop, in fact, I'm doing that right now, am I going to A, plug it in the nearest outlet, run it as far as I need to do to use the laptop, and stop? Or B, am I going to buy the longest extension cord I can, plug it in my bedroom, run it down the hallway, through the kitchen, into the dining room, around the spare room, out of the dining room and into the living room? Which is efficient? Which makes any sense? Shortest distance. Because here's the thing. As silly as it is that it does that in humans, it's hilarious that the laryngeal nerve in giraffes makes the same trip. Think of how long a giraffe's neck is. Would a 6-year-old run an extension cord, to use the metaphor again, that far and loop back around itself? It's a terrible design. There are other examples of this too. There are two types of olfactory sensors. For those of you who are looking at me blankly, an olfactory sensor is what allows you to have a sense of smell. There are ones that work in air, which is what humans have. And there's ones that work in water, which are what fish have. Dolphins have no sense of smell as adults. I've actually seen some things that apparently, as fetuses in the womb, they do, and then they lose them. Dolphins have the genes that if they were turned on, if they were activated, which they are not, would give them a sense of smell. If, as Young Earth Creationists would have us believe, dolphins were created to live in the oceans, logically one would conclude that they're going to have the capacity for a sense of smell that works in water, or not at all, or both if you want to argue that they just have both and the right ones get turned on in the right species. They don't have both. They don't have the organs for either, but they do have the deactivated genes to turn on a sense of smell that only works in air, which is useless to dolphins because they spend their entire life. They don't hunt in the air. They don't spend most of their time on the surface. And they why did an all powerful creator do that? Why is 3/4? And there's also sorts of other problems you can get into because people talk about how fine tuned the universe is. It's like the universe is so fine tuned for human life. Why is 3/4 of the planet useless to us? You can't live at the bottom of the ocean floor. Why is the 99.999999999% of the universe not only useless to humans, but antithetical to humans? If you vanished off of Earth and reappeared almost anywhere else in the universe, in fact, anywhere else as far as we know, but there are probably Earth-like planets out there somewhere, you would die. You would quite possibly die very quickly if you just appear. Because you probably the biggest area that you're likely to appear in is the empty void of space. That's not fine tuned. It's a giant waste of space, and this is another part of my problem with all of this, which is it makes God look dumb. You have to assume that we were especially created to be the way that we are. You have to assume God made all these incredibly inefficient decisions for reasons. Okay, there's a lot more I could say about the science. In fact, I think I'm probably going to do future episodes continuing to discuss the science of the subject because I find the science fascinating, even if I barely have a layman's understanding of it. But fun 101. Something to look up, a little homework for you all. If you question the idea that dinosaurs evolved into birds, let's clarify one thing. Not all dinosaurs were the size of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, or Brontosaurus, or Brachiosaurus, or all the other various other ones out there. A lot, as I understand it, even most, were much smaller. Megafauna, which are the really big guys that we talk about and we all know and love. And yeah, I'm a nerd. I love dinosaurs. I think they're cool. I won't deny it. Are not that, but the big ones are not that common. So yeah, the idea T-Rex eventually became a chicken's maybe a little hard to swallow. How about a velociraptor? Those ones from Jurassic Park, or especially for that matter, a velociraptor, the way they actually were, which is a little big, not much bigger than the size of a chicken. For that matter, what about the fact that we actually have found evidence dinosaurs did in fact have feathers, hollow bones, warm-blooded, all of which are consistent with birds. But at any rate, if you want to question whether or not if you find the idea that dinosaurs evolved into birds odd, I have homework for you all. I'm not going to link to this because I want you to look it up. And tell you what, the first person to look this up and link to a video or photograph of it in the description will get a personal shout out from me in the next video I do. Or if you want to leave it, maybe I'll have you on. So your homework, your mission, if you choose to accept it, is to look up. What's the name of this thing? Cassowary. Particularly, look up, or for simply, look up dinosaur bird attacks car. Again, if you want a shout out or maybe more, be the first person to put a link to a video of a cassowary in the description. Tell me if that doesn't look like something that might came from a dinosaur. One more food for thought on the subject. With something that creationists have claimed was the great proof of the young Earth, that was actually backdoor evidence of evolution for them, which was a discovery by a woman by the name of Dr. Mary Schweitzer. Dr. Mary Schweitzer found soft tissue in a Tyrannosaurus rex femur bone. She's a paleontologist from North Carolina State University. Yeah, Mary Higby Schweitzer made a huge shook things up by finding evidence of soft tissue in a T Rex fossil. Specifically, she found collagen, a connective protein. Now, one thing people misunderstand is creationists have said that she found red blood cells. She didn't. She found collagen. It's not that big of a discovery. It's not as big a discovery as finding blood. Which isn't to say what she found wasn't important. It was. It was huge. It changed our understanding of a lot of things. But they also will argue that it couldn't have survived. That's impossible. You know, this sort of thing decomposes in thousands of years, not in millions. You actually research Dr. Schweitzer, who, for the record, is a Christian, who deeply resents how creationists have misused her work. She explains the finding within the terms of actual science. And it was a very small amount, as I understand it, microns, 1 or 2 microns of collagen. And here's the kicker. Here's the thing that creationists won't tell you about this exciting discovery. The collagen found is almost identical to collagen found in something alive today. And no, it's not crocodiles. It's not monitor lizards. It's not any other type of reptile. The collagen that was found in Tyrannosaurus rex bone is very almost identical to the collagen found in ostriches. Not the nail in the coffin lid of evolution that they think it is it? And here's the thing. Creationists will tell you that dinosaurs lived with humans, despite the complete lack of evidence thereof. They will point, Kent loves to point to some very poor evidence to support this claim. For example, he will tell you that cultures all over the world have legends of dragons, and dragons are clearly dinosaurs. There are legends of dragon-like creatures in many, many, many different cultures all over the world. This is absolutely true. They're not consistent with each other. Eastern dragons look very different than Western. They're usually amalgamations of animals, not reptilian the way that Western dragons are. Their temperament's very different. And here's the other thing. If you actually look at the earliest drawings of dragons, the fiery breath has an explanation. It's not actually fire. And what dragons are is actually explained by the existing living creatures. Monitor lizards. Monitor lizards are very large lizards. Komodo dragons fall into that general grouping of lizards. And the thing about lizards, particularly monitor lizards, is they have forked tongues. Knights in the Middle East people on who traveled to Asia as part of various caravans and things of that nature brought back stories of these types of lizards that they had seen. Artists drew the lizards, added various flourishes. This forked tongue lizard now has, instead of just the two prongs, 4 prongs, 6 prongs, 8 prongs, 10 prongs, and now it looks like it's breathing fire. That's where dragons come from. Also, for that matter, there are lots of other things that are legends of all over the world. Almost every culture has legends of vampires. I've never heard Kent argue that vampires must be real because everyone has legends about them. Or vampires, zombies, ghosts, um, gods. Just about every culture throughout history believes there are multiple gods, not just one. Um, he's picking this one legend that he thinks fits his belief and saying it's evidence he's right. Um, the other example that he will give is Behemoth from the Bible, and for that matter, Leviathan, particularly the way they're described in Job, because it's one of, not the only place, there's the one particular description. Let me get to it. Um, Here we go. Behemoth in the Bible. Job 40:20 to 15 to 24 describes him. Behold now Behemoth, which I made with thee. He eateth the grass as an ox. Lo now his strength is in his loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly. He moveth his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. His bones are as strong as pieces of brass. Bones are like bars of iron. He is the chief of the ways of God, and he that made him can make his sword to approach unto him. Surely the mountains bring forth food, or all the beasts of the field play. He lieth under shady trees, in the covert of the reed and fens. The shady trees cover him with their shadow, and the willow of the brook encompass about him. Behold, he drinketh up a river, and hasteth not. He trusteth that he can draw up the Jordan into his mouth. He taketh it with his eyes, his nose pierceth through snares. Now, Young Earth Creationists argue this is a dinosaur. But particularly they tend to focus on the verses, where is it? Job 40:17. He moveth his tail like a cedar. They'll point to that verse and look at cedars. Is there anything about a cedar that fits the small swaying? Because the common explanation is actually that what's being described here is either a rhinoceros, not a rhinoceros. We'll get back to that in a second. Is either hippopotamus or an elephant. Elephant, I think, particularly makes sense because of the later verses talking about it drawing its nose. But the hippopotamus certainly also makes sense. But they both have very small, swishy tails. They don't have tails like a giant cedar. That clearly means a dinosaur. The problem is you're thinking of an American cedar. The author of Job never set foot in the United States. Never set foot in the Americas. You want to look at cedars as you find them in the Middle East and in Africa. And in those places, cedars are thinner and willowy, and they move back and forth in the wind, kind of like a tail. There's another argument I've seen made that I find kind of entertaining, which is look around at the verses around it. For Job 40:16, lo, his strength is in his loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly. For that matter, in 17, he moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. His stones would be his genitalia, male genitalia. Can anyone think of an aspect of male genitalia that becomes rigid, maybe like a cedar. Anyone? Anyone? Bueller? 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 I, it's at least possible that the author of Job is making a male genitalia joke. I'll put it like that to make it YouTube friendly. Leviathan, similarly, isn't describing a dinosaur. What it's describing is pretty straightforward. I'm not going to look it up in the verse and break it down like that again, but it's describing a lot. Basically, it's describing a crocodile, a Nile crocodile, which is a huge 9 foot long reptile of considerable power, whose scales would have been very difficult to pierce with the Bronze and Iron Age weapons available at the time of the writing of the Book of Job. It's huge, it's ferocious. You find it in the oceans. It's not something you want to mess with. Or the waters, I should say. For that matter, you do find an even bigger crocodile, saltwater crocodiles, in the oceans. They're absolutely enormous and not something you really would want to meddle with. Um, there is a channel called Digital Hammurabi, for example. He's an Assyriologist, so he knows infinitely more about the time period, mythology, and religions of the ancient Near East than I will. He's probably forgotten about it more about it than I ever will know. To put it bluntly, he's done videos on this. I recommend checking him out. Um, but again, it's not discussing a dinosaur. It's a creative thing. But and here's the other thing with that. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that we found some distant, remote part of Africa where Tyrannosaurus Rex was still running around. Does this in any way validate the theory of evolution? No. We have found what they call living fossils, the most famous example being the coelacanth, um, which were animals thought to be extinct that are still, in fact, alive. Again, an animal that's well adapted to its environment survives. Sometimes, if it's extremely well adapted, a case in point, sharks are exceptionally well adapted to the oceans and have survived for millions of years largely unchanged. They've gotten smaller. They don't need to. There's been variations, certainly, but they largely exist the way they do because it works. The last thing before I get about the science of evolution for today, because again I want to get back into this in future videos, I want to comment on is the question of are humans evolving now, and the answer is yes. Humans are currently evolving as we speak. Don't believe me, let me give you two examples. I have right now in my refrigerator a gallon of milk. I'm not particularly in the mood for it at the moment, but if I wanted to, I could get up, grab a glass, pour myself some milk, and drink it down without getting sick. I'm not lactose intolerant. Granted, some people are. Most people don't understand why that's significant. Most mammals lose the ability to digest milk when they become adults. Our genetic evidence suggests somewhere between 3 and sometime beyond 6,000 years ago, human adults were unable to process milk. Then somewhere between 3 and 6,000 years ago, we developed that ability. To the point that the majority of us can, in fact, digest milk successfully, even as full-grown adults. I'm 43. I can drink milk just fine, thank you. It's evolution. It's not huge, sweeping, grand evolution. Although we've seen speciation even in our own lifetime. Again, links in the description in terms of examples of speciation. But another example of human evolution is wisdom teeth. Fun thing, humans are losing our wisdom teeth. They're a good example of something that doesn't really serve the purpose it had in the past. A lot of people have to have them removed, but people are being born with smaller wisdom teeth, and actually some people are being born with no wisdom teeth at all. I, for example, am 43 and have not had to have my wisdom teeth taken out of my mouth. Um, if memory serves, because it's been a while since I've had the X-rays and had this discussion with a dentist, but it sounds like I may never have to have my wisdom teeth removed. It's a genetic fluke. It's a mutation. Again, there's ample evidence, information out there. If you're honest enough to look, I highly recommend you do so. But enough about that. Let's talk. Let me get into Kent and Kent. I'm going to get into why Young Earth Creationism in general is bad for Christianity, and then I'm going to criticize Kent Hovind Ham personally a little. First, like I said, the idea of Young Earth Creationism presupposes God is a liar. We have to assume God built all of this evidence that I've been going over for the last almost 2 hours into our universe, knowing exactly how humans would interpret it. He knew he would interpret it this way. He knew he would come to the conclusion that the universe was billions of years old, not 6,000 years old. That life evolved instead of being created out of thin air, or simply, dust. God breathed on dust and created man, or took a rib from man and created a woman. We have to assume that he did all of this, even knowing it would deceive people and lead people away from him. Either God is some sort of malevolent prankster, or God is not very bright, or this is what happened, in my opinion. But it implies that God is a liar. Another thing to realize is the idea of evolution is not incompatible with Christianity. There are two arguments that are usually used to try and say the two are mutually exclusive. One is that without evolution, without the story of the Garden of Eden, there's no need for original sin. My answer to which is, and if we take the story of the Garden of Eden as parables, as poetry, as a story designed to illustrate a point that, in my opinion, at least one of the many meanings you can take out of it is that humans can't, even if you give humans a perfect world, we still can't follow the rules. And you can see that. I think you can see that play out in how many rich people are horrible, immoral people. Not all rich people. There's some very good. There's some rich people who do a lot of good things. And the famous line in the Bible: "It's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter into heaven." But if you assume that the story of the Garden of Eden isn't literal, and by the way, in terms of considering that, consider something else. If Genesis is absolutely literal in the way it was written, why is there two different accounts? Was man and woman created simultaneously, or was man created first, and then Eve created from a rib? Because Genesis 1 and 2 don't actually agree with each other on everything. There are historical reasons for this relating to basically adaptation of parts of the Babylonian creation myth. And trying to reconcile the two is why a new chapter was added to the book of Genesis, believe it or not. In reality, Genesis and a number borrows from other Near Eastern religion in a couple of places. Most notably, the story of Noah's flood is almost entirely lifted from the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was written somewhere around 1,000 years before the Bible, but has almost the exact same story. Just the names are changed. And the origins of the flood is something outside of tonight's episode, really. Needless to say, there's no evidence whatsoever for a worldwide flood. In fact, all evidence points to a worldwide flood being impossible. More likely, it was Genesis is talking about a localized flood, particularly a localized flood on what these days we call the Iraqi floodplain. Why that makes sense, you can hear right in the name, Iraqi floodplain. But to get on point, let's assume for a moment that every child is not born with the sins of Adam and Eve to answer for. Does that make humans pure? Does that make us without sin? No, it doesn't. Infants, Christians pretty much universally agree that infants are without sin. You have to have the ability to recognize the difference between good and evil before you can be held accountable for that. If you're a toddler, you don't have the intellectual capacity to be evil or sinful. Which is why most rational Christians believe all babies basically go directly to heaven. If that's true, why do we need original sin? Once people are capable of making their own decisions, we inevitably will screw up because humans are by definition imperfect. Couldn't Is it an unreasonable point to make that Genesis is actually a parable for humans developing self awareness and the ability? We ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and we understood what is and is not, what is good and what is evil. The nature of morality. Kind of sounds like a parable for the development of self awareness to me, don't you think? There's poetry in the book of Genesis. There's poetry. Read when Adam and Eve interact. It doesn't sound like people talking. It sounds like poetry. Um, and the importance of a text and the value of the text is not just in its literal truth. This is, I discussed a while back the problems I see it with Christian movies. Christians have forgotten the importance and the value of fable and parable. And we used to understand that, and Christ certainly understood it. We forgot the importance of story. The point of telling us the story of Genesis isn't to teach us scientific truth, it's to teach us a philosophical truth. The Bible is not a science textbook. There are many things about the Bible says that are verifiably wrong. Using it as a science textbook does a disservice both to science and to the Bible itself. You do not need to reject science. And yes, if you're a young Earth creationist, you reject science. You can make the excuse. You talk about loving science all you want. You are saying that to say that the Earth is 6,000 years old is to say biology, physics, cosmology, zoology, geology, paleontology, anthropology, history in general are all wrong. Because of your interpretation of the Bible. And let's be clear, your interpretation of a translation of the Bible. And really, it's a translation of the Bible. King James, King James only is no. I'm sorry, the King James is not God's perfect translation, and some of the claims I've heard them make are laughable on levels that make flat Earth almost unbelievable. I had one tell me that ancient Hebrew is basically the same as English. It's like battle loss. Um, you don't. The point of Christ's message was about our responsibility for our own actions. That you will be held, God will hold you to an accounting for your sins. Yes, the Bible talks about the sins of the father being visited upon the son to the third and fourth generation. There are many more than 3 and 4 generations between Adam and Eve if we take that story literally. But we're still paying the price for his mistake, even though Jesus is called the second Adam in the Bible who corrected the errors of the past. If I died tomorrow and Genesis was wrong, would I be sinless? I know I wouldn't. I've done things I'm not proud of. I've done things I consider sins. I've lied and things of that nature. I think everyone else listening to my voice has done those things, and some have done worse. I'm not. I'm not saying that you're all worse than me or as bad as I am. I'm sure there are people out there that are better than me, and there are people that are worse than me. I think I'm real. I try to be a good person. I think I tend to fall somewhere in the average. Um, and again, I believe in my salvation is by faith, not by works. Um, so it's really silly to, if you believe, works are important to salvation. Again, as I said in my Why I'm a Christian soapbox, I believe in redemption. I don't believe in, I say I believe in God and everything's good, all hunky dory and roses again. Um, because the Bible does say that faith, yes, it says that great grace is a gift born of faith, so that no man, not works, so that no man may boast. It also says that faith without works is dead. Um, but that's getting off topic. Kent Hovind and Ken Ham do a fundamental disservice to Christianity by saying it hinges upon the book of Genesis. If it hinges upon the book of Genesis, um, Ken, if you're listening, please provide me scientific evidence that the moon produces its own light, because the Bible says that it does. Find for me the location of the four pillars upon which the earth rests, because the Bible says that too. Find me evidence that the earth hangs motionless in space. Some Christians have chosen this particular hill to die on. The earth has to be 6,000 years old because a bishop a couple of hundred years ago made some calculations and came up with a number. The reality is the majority of Christians don't see it this way. Catholics, Orthodox, Anglicans, Episcopals, all generally are on the side of evolution and the Big Bang. In point of fact, largely the only people left that are holding out in the United States, according to the Pew Research study, is white, specifically white, not black, evangelical Protestants. Um, Another argument that I'm not going to go into in great depth, I'll do this in another video, is of course that evolution is an evil theory because it gave rise to the Nazis. It gave rise to racism, and Darwin himself was horribly racist. Was he racist to a point? Probably. Um, by today's standards, by the standards of his times, he was amazingly tolerant. Even his book, The Origin of Species, creationists will tell, Matt Powell in his video Science Falsely So Called, which really, so many things what's wrong with that. Several atheists have done excellent videos tearing it to shreds, but argues that atheists are embarrassed by the full title, which is or the sin of man, or is the selection of natural, or by means of selection of favored races. The book never uses the word race in relationship to humans. Um, it's always in that book relations to animal. So a lot of the other quotes about him that are supposedly racist are actually misquotes or quote mines. Um, he talks in his Voyage of the Beagle about one of the best men he ever knew, who was black. He came from a long line of abolitionists that were against slavery. Um, and the other argument, of course, is that Adolf Hitler was, of course, based all of his ideas on evolution, which is flatly absurd, particularly given the fact that if you double check the lists, the Nazis actually ordered copies of Charles Darwin's Origin of Species burned, and he dismissed the idea and found it arrogant and antithetical, according to Mein Kampf, that humans were descendants of apes. Um, but even if we take those both as true, even though they're not, it's what's called an appeal to consequences. Just because somebody took an idea and used it to justify something terrible doesn't mean the idea is bad. The ideas need to stand on their own merits, not on what people do with them. This, for example, is a reason why Christianity is not why a handful of atheists who will say Christianity is horrible, look at the Crusades, the witch hunts, etc., are wrong. It's an appeal to consequences. That somebody did something horrible with the idea doesn't make the idea wrong. But okay, so let's talk briefly about Kent and Ken. I'll start with Ken because I probably have less to say about Ken Ham. Ken Ham is from New Zealand, I want to say, and I'll give him credit. The man actually has a degree in applied science, climate science specifically, I believe, which is ironic given he's a global warming denier, well, climate change denier. Um, he built an ark. He has a creation museum in Kentucky. He has also more recently built what he calls the Ark Encounter, which is a giant model building vaguely in the shape that he thinks Noah's Ark was in. Um, he also does terrible things, in my opinion, immoral things like tell children. If a scientist tries to explain any things we've been talking about tonight, ask them, "Were you there? Who should you trust, God or the scientist?" God. And to small children, and not this idea of you need to believe what I tell you to. You need to reject and refuse to listen to people who disagree with me because those people are anti-God. It's dishonest because people who support most scientists and scientifically literate people, aka what Ken would call evolutionists, are themselves Christian. Particularly outside of the United States, Christians almost entirely accept the reality of evolution. The Roman Catholic Church, and yes, sorry, again, they're Christian. If you want to say the Catholics aren't Christian, a real shorthand answer to why that's a problem, is Christianity the biggest religion in the United States today or not? Because if you don't count Roman Catholics in that number, they're not. Islam is. In fact, worldwide, Islam would beat out Christianity. So you can't claim any kind of majority if you reject Catholicism. But for that matter, you also have to reject the various Orthodox faiths, all of which predate Protestantism by hundreds of years. The Anglicans, Episcopalians, all of whom also generally accept evolution. It is a false dichotomy to say you either believe in God or you believe in evolution. Most people accept evolution and believe in God. The biggest problem I have with Ken, though, aside from the problems I've already got into, that effectively he calls God a liar, is the Ark Encounter itself. It is a large amusement park. I refuse to dignify it or the Creation Museum by saying they're museums, because they're not. It's not even a very good one. You can find videos of it on YouTube if you want to see the inside without paying the $40-some a person it costs to go walk around a three-story wooden box with pictures on the walls, and a couple of statues. Just about, save your money, watch the video. They built it partly with state funds. Now, this is not to say that the state just handed them money. Thankfully, they didn't. On the other hand, they're getting a substantial kickback on taxes and got essentially a loan from the state to build this travesty. And a percentage of the salary of every person who works at the Ark, it's like 1 or 2%, is required to going to pay back that loan. Religious organizations should not use state funds. This is a fundamental violation of the separation of church and state. It's bad because it is the government endorsing a specific religion. It's also bad because you are opening the doors of your religious group to the government. When you let the door goes both ways. You're giving the government a say. This has even already come up over taxations because they wanted to put a health and safety tax on tickets to the Ark because the reality they were needing more police and things of that nature. So Kent went and sold to the Ark, which was supposed to be a for-profit business, or at least the gate to the Ark, which is to his non-profit religious organization to get out of paying the tax, which then created a new issue because, yeah, by doing that, it was now a religious organization, which means even in the flimsy court decisions that let them get the money they got from the state, they couldn't do that anymore. Um, all of which is extremely dishonest. And Ken is not about presenting the facts. Now let's talk about Kent Hovind. You'll notice throughout this video and in the description, I refer to Kent Hovind as Kent Hovind. At no point have I ever called the man doctor. There's a reason for that. To Ken Ham's credit, he has a bachelor's from an accredited university, even in a scientific field. Kent Hovind has a high school diploma. He went to college at an actual legitimate university. He dropped out. He then filed. Welcome back, Lisa. He then went to a diploma mill to got himself a bachelor's, a master's degree, and a PhD. When I say a diploma mill, I mean a university run out of a trailer. It is not accredited by the government. It has carries no weight in academic circles. There's a reason while Kent claims he taught high school science, he's never taught it and never will teach it at a public high school or an accredited university. He doesn't have the credential. All he has, as far as the academic world is concerned, is a high school diploma and a fancy piece of paper that says that he's a doctor. If you want a perfect example of this, you go online. There are various sources. You can look up people's doctoral dissertations. Paper they have to write and defend to get their doctorate. Where's Ken's? It's not public. It was made publicly available by WikiLinks, but his supposed university didn't release it. Yes, as Lisa puts it, the first sentence of his dissertation is, "Hi, my name is Kent Hovind," which is his signature line everywhere. Every debate, every lecture he gives, every sermon he gives. "Hi, my name is Kent Hovind." So strike one, he has no legitimate academic credentials. No, you don't need to have gone to college to be an intelligent person. Plenty of intelligent people throughout history didn't even. They're highly intelligent people. Thomas Edison, for one, he didn't even graduate high school. Neither did Benjamin Franklin, if memory serves. I myself, because of mistakes I made as a younger man, fell out. Had to drop out of college. I didn't finish. But when you go around calling yourself Dr. Dino and hinging things on how you have a doctorate and you don't have a legitimate doctorate as far as the academic world is concerned, you lose credibility. It's simply not true. Aside from that, I have a good friend that has been on this channel multiple times now and will be on again in the future without a doubt, named Virgo Triad. Those of you who have seen Virgo's videos, or for that matter have seen my interviews with her, know Virgo's particular target of videos is the sovereign citizen movement, people that believe the U.S. government has no jurisdiction over them, and make some of the most ridiculous arguments you've ever heard for why that is. So while doctor is not a title that Kent has any legitimate claim to, he does have a legitimate claim to the title of ex-convict. Kent got caught by the U.S. government doing funny business with his taxes, and he went to prison for 10 years for it. And what's funny is his argument in court was not that it was innocent. It was not some defense related to being in a religious organization. It was that as a sovereign child of God, the U.S. government has no authority over him. He thought that would actually work. He didn't. That's why he went to jail for 10 years. He also made the colossal blunder that seriously brings into question his level of intelligence of discussing the hiding of assets on a recorded line that he had been informed in writing was being recorded because it was a prison phone. It boggles the mind. And the third thing that I actually personally would consider worse than his being one of the staunchest defenders of the Young Earth movement is his promotion of a substance known as laetrile or amygdalin. Laetrile is amygdalin, is a compound that can be found in many seeds: apple seeds, apricot seeds, a number of other plant seeds. If you consume it, your body will break the compound down into a number of chemicals, including hydrogen cyanide. So taking high doses of amygdalin has the exact same symptoms as cyanide poisoning. Here's why this relates to Kent. And he's not the one who coined this by any stretch of the imagination, calls amygdalin vitamin B17. It's not a vitamin. And he tells people it cures cancer. There is absolutely, positively no scientific evidence that amygdalin cures cancer. He's never produced it. No one else has ever produced it. On the other hand, it is a fact if you take it in high doses, particularly the certain doses they claim will cure cancer, you can poison yourself and potentially become very sick or even die. So let's be clear. Kent is advocating for the taking of a substance that has no medical value whatsoever, contains a highly deadly toxin. The only good thing I can say about it is, unlike his son, he doesn't sell it. And here's the funny thing. One of the claims that he and other supporters of B17 make is that the big pharma hates it because they can't patent it. This is also untrue. There is a related substance known as laetrile, which is available not, as I understand, in the United States, but is available in other countries for purchase. Laetrile is a synthetic compound based on amygdalin. While amygdalin itself, being a natural compound, is not and cannot be patented, laetrile has a U.S. patent. If this thing worked, they could sell it and they could make money and they could have it patented. It doesn't work. If you disagree with my assessment, I invite you to provide peer-reviewed articles in the description, in the links below, that show that this works. Even if Kent's often silly arguments against evolution, you want an example of silly, he argues that the cabbage proves that evolution can't happen. Because how could the cabbage have evolved? I can tell you how the cabbage evolved, Kent. It's called artificial selection. And yes, that was, for those of you who know Kent, that was an attempt to mimic his rather unique way of speaking. The cabbage is related to cauliflower, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and Brussels sprouts. All of them came from the same common plant. Humans sometime around during ancient Rome, bred for selected traits and got cabbages. For that matter, they also got all of the other things I just mentioned. But they all come from the same root. It not only is it an example of evolution, it's evolution run by humans. Lisa's absolutely right. They are all the same species, but they're very different. Another good example of this point, of course, I'm honestly waiting for the day he makes a video about how dogs disprove evolution. Remember, Canis lupus domesticus or familiaris. Dogs are the result of human genetic tinkering with wolves. If you want an example of how drastic artificial selection can cause changes in a relatively short period of time, while not all, the majority of dog breeds, about 100 years old. They were genetics, basically do-it-yourself genetics experiments in the 19th century. The late 19th century at that. There are some that are older, but on the whole, dog breeds are a very modern invention of people breeding animals with dogs for particular traits. For that matter, they bred wolves with wolves way back when, around 10,000 years ago, for loyalty and pack mentality and things of that nature, to eventually produce dogs. Granted, dogs are a subspecies of wolf; they're still capable of interbreeding with each other. But a Chihuahua and many of others, and anyone dot sounds, beagles don't look a whole lot like Timberwolves, do they? Even though they are in fact related and descended from each other. We did it with selective breeding. It's the same basic process of evolution, just done a little faster and done with human involvement. I think that's going to wrap it up for tonight. This was supposed to be a relatively short video, and I've gone 2 hours. I may or may not have a video tomorrow. I need to give that some thought. I'm actually considering moving our Thursday night show to Sunday night, just because if I keep doing it Thursday night for the time being, I'm going to be the only one doing it, and I'd rather not be the only one doing it. I think the show's better with the gang. And at least Brian, my co-host Brian, seems to be available on Sundays, so we may be moving to Sunday nights. That's going to do it for tonight. I want to remind everybody, if you like what I'm doing, please consider liking, commenting, subscribing. If you don't like what I'm doing, consider giving me a thumbs down, commenting, and subscribing to see what crazy thing I say next. And do, of course, share it with all your friends. I would personally love it if somebody shared this to Kent or Ken, and I got a response from either or both of them. That would be absolutely delightful. I will say now I have no interest or intention of engaging either of them in a debate. If Ken, in terms of Ken Ham in a debate, Bill Nye wiped the floor with him in his own auditorium, and I've watched Ken Hovind, lose debates to Aaron Raw, King Crocoduck, Bill Ludlow, and many, many other people. I've never actually seen him even hold his own in a debate. And these are people that understand science vastly better than I do. I hardly need to jump into the fray here. Lastly, folks, if you enjoy what we're doing, and you'd like to help us out, remember once again, we'd like to get the show back into the studio, but to do that takes money. You can please consider donating to our Patreon, patreon.com/demonology, patreon.com/demonology. Links in the description. But that's going to do it for tonight. I want to thank you all for listening. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. Again, sorry it went so long. It wasn't meant to. Have a good night all, and God bless.